Oh, good, you're here, because today we're going to talk about misinformation and disinformation. And yes, there is a difference. Misinformation is a virus unto itself, and Fox News is the vector. These are a few not untrue words that were spoken by a CNN anchor in regards to how Donald Trump, the Trump White House, and conservative media outlets such as Fox News help fan the flames of discontent and misinformation, especially during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it's a badass quote, and it definitely cuts to the core of, why this is happening and why everything feels so irreparably broken sometimes. But it doesn't paint the full picture because it refers to misinformation as its own virus. And even though misinformation often goes viral, it generally comes from a source that is a hair more insidious: disinformation. The absolute most frustrating part of any news cycle is trying to keep up with and combat the sheer amount of misinformation that is spread about a candidate or a policy, but also stuff that's happening internationally, America's place on the world stage, who we are as people. I mean, one of the things that I'm mostly focused on is trying to prove that we don't all hate each other and we're not that different. But misinformation often targets what is the truth about Americans. Who are your friends? Who are your neighbors? What are their values? Misinformation might have you thinking that all your friends and neighbors hate you, or maybe you should hate them, and that rugged individualism is the only way we could possibly survive in these trying and unprecedented times. That's misinformation. But the most frustrating element of all of that chaos is that the feelings that you are getting from the things you're seeing online are likely rooted in disinformation. Now, people often use the terms misinformation and disinformation interchangeably, but the truth is there is a key distinction between the two. So today, I kind of want to schoolhouse rock us into not only understanding the difference between the two, but potentially helping you better identify when you're being sold some bullshit covered in gold paint again. But because this channel is still new, hello, my name is V, and this is my YouTube channel where I'll be diving deeper under the desk to find the crumpled paper trails of long-forgotten history, while also gently reminding you that when it seems like everything is going to be awful, there is almost always a light at the end of the tunnel. So make sure to like and subscribe, because today we are talking about the difference between misinformation and disinformation. Let me tell you something. As the American Psychological Association defines it, misinformation is false or inaccurate information, just getting your facts wrong. Here's an example. Peter Pan is the angel of death. This is misinformation, but it leans on things that were true at the time when the book was being written and that modern interpretations of that time have placed relevance on. So they're saying Peter Pan is the angel of death. It's a hot take, but in Victorian times when Peter Pan takes place, he does visit children at their window, and he does take them to a land where they never grow up. And in Victorian times, having a window open in a sick child's room was a common way to rid the room of bad air, because doctors thought that bad air was the root of all illness. So the idea of some sprightly fellow coming to the window to take away a child who was infected with bad air, it's not totally off. And if you add to that the idea that in Neverland, children never grow up, well, it must mean that they died. And Peter Pan is the angel of death for children. This conspiracy that Pan is grim is so prevalent that you might think J.M. Barrie himself gave a TED Talk about how Peter Pan is the angel of death. But he didn't, because he's not. J.M. Barrie, the author of Peter Pan, did not intend Pan to be the angel of death for children. J.M. Barrie based Peter Pan on himself. He was a man who wished to never grow up. He was a grown man who lived as a celibate person because he says he could not understand romantic love. It's why he writes in the book that kisses are akin to acorns, buttons, and thimbles. Don't make sense to him. And he says that he wrote Peter Pan because he saw Pan as the consummate outsider. And that's how Barrie felt about himself. Peter Pan is not the angel of death, as much as we could try to make that make sense. Now, Barrie did write The Lost Boys to represent the dead. The Lost Boys loosely represent a generation of boys who were lost in World War I. Many of them were not even 18 years old. He did not see Pan as being the one to greet them in death and take them to Neverland or heaven or however you want to call it. But you could see how that truth about who the Lost Boys represent got mixed up with the Peter Pan lie and, well, misinformation. A mistake, really. Letting a story get away from the root fact. Not doing it on purpose to hurt people, just sometimes making a mistake or deciding that something means something because you can make it make sense. That's misinformation. Now, much like misinformation, disinformation can also feel real. It might even make sense. But disinformation is flat out and provably wrong. It is an intentional deception or a lie that is often used to influence a narrative to create a new truth. So if I were to say something to you like, the pink and blue Power Rangers were specifically engineered by the Clinton administration to turn an entire generation bisexual, that's disinformation, y'all. Even if there may be an ounce of truthful correlation in there, I mean, whose first crush wasn't a Power Ranger, am I right? But they were not intentionally created to be the sexual awakening for millennials or anyone else, okay? And I caught you because you were like, well, but the Power Rangers were kind of that for me. No, disinformation is tricky like that. It is crafted to make you try and make what you heard true, especially if you liked what you heard. We are more tricked by mis and disinformation that reinforces our bias than we are when we hear something totally crazy. Now, disinformation is obviously far more insidious than misinformation, which is likely the result of like a misunderstanding or someone applying a correlation to the situation and not just like flat out lying to you for fun. And that could be the end of this episode, right? I've given you the explanation as to what dis and misinformation is, but it's oftentimes not just saved for how we interpret children's books or 1990s television shows. Unfortunately, mis and disinformation cause far greater harm. Recently, Trump falsely claimed that children radically change after getting vaccinated. This comes from a conversation Trump had with former presidential candidate and current brainworm survivor Robert F. Kennedy Jr. When Trump described vaccinations for children as like 38 vaccines met for a horse, and then you see the baby all of a sudden start to change radically. Like, what? Like a lot of what Trump says, this really just sounds like a half-remembered rambling of what somebody that was barely paying attention to something they were told in class told him. Very telephone game. The truth, as the Associated Press points out, is that there are no 38 disease shots. Babies and toddlers might get 4 or 5 vaccinations during a checkup to protect them against dangerous and deadly diseases. The American Academy of Pediatricians is adamant that a handful of vaccines does not overwhelm a healthy tot's immune system. After all, babies' immune systems are pretty strong, and they handle a huge number of everyday germs that they encounter. That does not mean that you should walk up to your friend's baby and kiss them, okay? A lot of people don't want you kissing their babies for a lot of reasons. Listen to the parents, but also listen to the science, okay? Now, Trump saying that babies are radically changed by vaccines, I could just chalk that up to disinformation, but I don't actually believe that Trump believes that the statement is false. When you pal around with folks like RFK Jr. and Laura Loomer and Marjorie Taylor Greene, your rhetoric sounds a lot less presidential and a lot more, I watched an Andrew Wakefield documentary, just trust me, bro. It's legit, bro. Also, when you surround yourself with people who run with wild conspiracy theories, you start to feel less crazy espousing your own conspiracy theories and disinformation. In fact, when it comes to the difference between misinformation and disinformation, Donald Trump could be best described as Schrodinger's bullshit artist, okay? What came first, Trump telling the lie or the lie informing Trump? Is he the misnomer or the disinformer? Ugh. The cynic in me wants to say it's always the latter. But again, there are times when the lines are simply far too blurred to tell the difference. Like, check this out. Right before the election ended, I came across this article by Jill Colvin for the Associated Press with the title, "Trump is using election lies to lay out groundwork for challenging the 2024 results if he loses." Now, we all know how the election turned out. But if he lost, he was going to say it was rigged. And if he won, he simply said it was too big to rig. Now, the article laid out a perfect roadmap for Trump, almost as if he had been planning for the loss more than he had planned for his own victory. His eternal quest to be like more of a bridesmaid, less of a bride is, I don't know, people like him are just more comfortable as the victim. As Colvin puts it, Trump spent all of 2024 urging his followers to give him a victory too big to rig, because he could only lose if the Democrats cheat. And you gotta trust him. I mean, the man knows a thing or two about cheating, am I right, fellas? It takes one to know one. But the most interesting part of this article is how Jill Colvin breaks down Trump's demonstrably false claims about the election, then fact checks each and every one of them. Now, I could make a video on all of the lies that he told during the 2024 election, but I think we have all endured enough election talk, so I will focus on just one. This is the one where Colvin details how Trump has alleged countless times that the Democrats have allowed migrants to enter the United States illegally just so they can register to vote and, of course, vote for Democrats only. And yet, as Colvin writes, it takes years for newcomers to become citizens, and only citizens can legally cast ballots in federal elections. Isolated cases of non-citizens being caught trying to vote, like the University of Michigan student from China who was arrested for allegedly casting an illegal ballot, do not reflect a larger conspiracy. And the fact that we catch these people means the system is working to catch those small outliers of voter fraud. Trump has made these claims about migrants voting in elections without evidence for years. In fact, the Washington Post actually analyzed the Heritage Foundation's database of voter fraud cases brought by prosecutors and found a whopping 85 cases that alleged non-citizens were voting. And that's not just in 2024 or any singular election. That is all time from 2002 when they started keeping records to 2023. So is this misinformation from Donald Trump, or is it disinformation that migrants are crossing the border in record numbers to vote for Democrats? I don't know, actually, because it's not even an original accusation. It's something we've been dealing with forever, actually, okay? NPR reported that exaggerated claims about non-citizens committing voter fraud actually go back to the 1800s. And experts say they usually spike during periods of non-white immigration due to fears about how the influx of non-white people will change the country. It is incredibly likely that the anti-migrant rhetoric, a touchstone of every single one of Trump's election campaigns, comes from a third-party purveyor of disinformation. It is just as likely that he pulled that out of his spray-tanned ass. So I don't know. Is it disinformation from like a foreign actor, or is it misinformation because he can't stop himself from lying all the time? It is most definitely an example of misinformation and disinformation being equally dangerous. Allison Alderman of the Brennan Center for Justice reports that as a result of fear-mongering surrounding non-citizen voters, many states have incorrectly flagged citizens as non-citizens and wiped them out of their electoral rolls. This happened in Texas in 2019, when notices were sent to about 95,000 people, many of whom had been voters for decades. Texas ended up boasting that 6,500 non-citizens had been taken off the database, with little to no evidence that most of the purge people were actually non-citizens. It happened in June of this year in Tennessee when 14,000 registered voters were slammed with the demand for proof of citizenship. It also happened in Ohio and in Virginia and in Alabama, the latter of which saw Secretary of State Wes Allen admitting that Alabama may have messed up and dropped some U.S.-born citizens into the non-citizen kick-them-off-the-voter-rolls sheets. No matter whether it's misinformation or disinformation, the effects of either can be quite damaging. And yet, when we talk about active disinformation, I mean, it's like hard for me to even think of where to start. Should we start with Russian disinformation campaigns online, Pizzagate, North Korean propaganda efforts, the often repeated lie that cute little pit bulls are naturally aggressive bad dogs? There's no shortage of disinformation accessible to you on social media, or even, unfortunately, some news outlets now. And something we don't talk about enough is that the majority of what informs someone's opinion on a topic isn't even the video they watch. It comes from the comments section. We now know that 1/3 of people get their news on TikTok, but more than half of social media watchers say they firm up their opinion by checking the general consensus in the comments section. We know it, and so do the bots, who are increasingly infiltrating the comment sections of creators on all platforms to target certain hashtags and topics to become a controlling force in building a new narrative, a new truth, the truth that this other entity wants Americans to believe. This form of manipulation is called manufactured consensus, and we will dig into that on a future episode. The idea of like things look like everybody's agreeing, but there's some op behind it that's a lie. Katie Bernard and Fallon Roth at the Philadelphia Inquirer make the case that there may be nobody worse or more prominent contributing to active disinformation than Mr. Shadow President himself, Elon Musk. Elon? As Bernard Roth put it, the artist formerly known as Twitter has been fertile ground for misinformation for the last several election cycles. But a key difference this year is that the company's owner is now an active participant in its spread. When ex-owner Elon Musk opted to share a post alleging that 5,200 people had registered to vote at the address of a Philadelphia social services organization, it spread like wildfire. Musk's post, which remarked that this is crazy as he shared misinformation by another account, was viewed 16,300,000 times. 58,000 people shared it on their own profiles, and by comparison, a post shared by Philadelphia City Commissioner fact-checking the claim was only shared 40 times. with just 16,000 views. We cannot go toe-to-toe with misinformation in this way. And this is nothing new for Musk. Since purchasing Twitter and stripping its content moderation teams down to bare bones or worse, misinformation and disinformation have not only begun to spread at a wider pace, it's been encouraged. With the introduction of their purchased verification system that allows folks to monetize their posts, effectively monetizing clickbait, rage bait, and in many cases, mis and disinformation. This is also the same man who was in charge of America PAC, a pro-Trump political action campaign that was holding dubious daily million-dollar lotteries in exchange for signing a pro-America petition. He is also the man who, as Politico put it, helped spread accusations that FEMA was actively blocking donations to victims of Hurricane Helene and were seizing goods and locking them away for their own use. He also once suggested dropping nukes on Mars to make it habitable for humans. We are not dealing with a rational or honest person here, folks. We are sometimes dealing with multiple versions of an irrational and not honest person, as Musk is alleged to have several sock puppet accounts. Because remember, there's what he says, and then allegedly he is using several fake accounts to make it look like what he's saying is real. I think it's safe to say that Elon Musk is a chaos agent, okay? He is a true disinformation spreader, and he loves it. He revels in these things. He laughs about them. But aside from Musk, one of the most quantifiable, tragic examples of recent disinformation can be found in the COVID disinformation programs. Before you start calling me Taylor Lorenz or something, this is important. Listen, okay? NPR reported in April 2022 about a woman named Stephanie who succumbed to COVID-19 in what her daughter Lori described as a completely avoidable death. For most of her life, Stephanie was practical and responsible when it came to her health. And just before the beginning of the pandemic, Stephanie's health took a turn and she started staying home more often and getting online a little bit more. She began mainlining conspiracy theory videos about everything from reptilian aliens to controlling the government to vaccine disinformation. Stephanie sadly believed that COVID was a hoax and started a spiritual group of like-minded COVID deniers during lockdown. Shortly afterward, she began showing symptoms of COVID and refused to get tested. Her condition worsened, and she eventually passed away. This was a completely avoidable death, and sadly, not even an uncommon one. There were people in my own family that died of COVID because they would rather die doing what they love than fall for government interference. Even as recently as 2022, NPR found that many of the million-plus confirmed dead from COVID were likely victims of mis and disinformation. It got so bad that the FDA Commissioner Robert Califf once said, and I quote, "I believe that misinformation is now our leading cause of death. The spread of false information is quite literally a matter of life and death, my friends. And it doesn't matter how seemingly benign the lie is either. There are consequences to the spread of mis and disinformation. And thankfully, I've got you covered on ways to identify it so you don't get sold this malarkey. But it's something that we have to be deeply diligent about. There are numerous methods available to you and how to best identify mis and disinformation. But my current favorite one is one that I found from the BBC's reporting that has an easy strategy known as SIFT. It was created by a digital literacy expert named Mike Caulfield, and it breaks it down into 4 steps. 1. S is for stop. Take a breath. Pause. Stop before sharing or commenting on a story. We don't need to immediately react. I post the news sometimes days later, and it still slaps. Even if the post is not mis or disinformation, it's likely our gut reaction that's being unmeasured and lacking the bigger picture. We should stop. Number 2, investigate the source. Dig around. What is the source of this information? Did you hear it from a friend? Did you hear it from the algorithm? Was it a trusted creator or a bad faith actor? In the face of conventional wisdom in every college class I've ever taken, the BBC ironically says that you could start by seeing if the information you're hearing is available on Wikipedia, okay? Quote, while Wikipedia is not perfect, it has the benefit of being crowdsourced, which means that its articles about specific well-known people or organizations often cover aspects like controversies and political biases. Now, we're not writing lazy video essays here, people, okay? We're checking to see if something is even on Wikipedia. First off, to see, is this thing that no one's talking about, is it on Wikipedia? Is there anything we can learn from it, okay? Is this information that happened actually a long time ago but is being presented as present and maybe it's already resolved or something? If it's not there, investigate the reputation of the source posting. Are they a trusted individual or outlet? Are they experienced at whatever they're posting? And getting information from creators and your friends is perfectly normal. Peer-led information and storytelling, that's the best of who we are, okay? So it doesn't have to be some perfect expert, because there are doctors online that'll lie to you. They'll be like, well, I'm a doctor. And then turns out they're a doctor of like quackery and like whatever. Jordan Peterson's a doctor, okay? I wouldn't take advice from him either. But after you do this, after you qualify your source, ask yourself, do you still trust this creator's expertise in the subject if they were saying something that you disagreed with? Because we are more often tricked by things that we want to be true than by things that we think are crazy. F is for find better coverage. If you haven't found your answer by the time you reached SI, then it's time to dig deeper. Find another source covering the info. That's the SIF in SIFT. Now you can do that via Google or another search engine. You can reverse look up photos or anything like that. You can even go as far as to say, depending on your level of media literacy, check out Reddit. And I am putting a big ol' asterisk on Reddit, okay? This is me speaking like, cautiously, okay? Never, ever, ever take what some random Redditor is saying as gospel, okay? Reddit, like every other social media platform, is just as susceptible to misinformation as any other, and people get wild over there, but sometimes they are onto something. So it's not, it's worth checking, okay? Sometimes I look at Reddit just to see, like, has this been picked up by the absolute batshits yet? Because if it is, maybe it's not as true as I want it to be, right? I mean, the people who agree with you are also important to consider when you are qualifying information. But Reddit can also be full of some of the most helpful, thorough minds available on the internet. There's a good reason why your coworker has told you get better Google results if you add the word Reddit to the end of your search terms. Also, if you didn't know that, that's a little tip. By searching Reddit, it's likely you'll find results that Google buried or filter out, and they could be credible sources. They're on Reddit because someone else shared them. That means something. But after that, if you still can't find what you're looking for in a search, even on Reddit, and no one else seems to be talking about it, now you're on to the final letter of how we sort disinformation, the T. T is for trace the claim to its original context. And I mean, do this in any way to give credit where credit is due, because whether the claim is false or not, you should always know the original context of whatever it is that you're reading. The most important part here is that news, like most communication, is a game of telephone. Follow the wires until you reach the origin point. And if at this point you still can't verify the information, well, then it's probably a lie. Probably some crackpot thing that somebody made up online and you could just kind of like relieve yourself of it or laugh, or maybe it was a joke or it's satire or I don't know. Maybe, just maybe, don't quote tweet it to dunk on it, okay? Because the next person who sees it might say, oh shit, maybe this is true, and share it without context, okay? Even sharing things or commenting on things that you know are disinformation or lies can be harmful because it boosts that content. Like my military friends say, bash is cash, baby. They handle the online trolls a lot better than I do. You're going to use SIFT to make sure that you're not becoming one of these online trolls. SIFT. Who do we appreciate? Mike Caulfield. Thank you, Mike Caulfield, for SIFT. By putting these sorts of tactics to the test, we can arm ourselves to better not only identify lies, but put a stop to them. There's a famous quote I want to share before we leave for the day. A lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put its pants on. Winston Churchill. No, he didn't say that. Did you look it up? Did you even look it up? Winston Churchill never said that, okay? That was a test. That was a little test. An investigation by PolitiFact found that quote goes even further back than that. President Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of State Cordell Hull once wrote, "A lie will gallop halfway around the world before the truth has time to pull its breeches on." English clergyman Thomas Franklin in the 1800s once said a version of that went, "Falsehood will fly, as it were, on the wings of the wind, and carry its tails to every corner of the earth. Whilst truth lags behind, her steps, though sure, are slow and solemn." I mean, that one's not as catchy and actually kind of makes me feel bad about myself, but this neuroscience researcher at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, Bonnie Taylor Blake, told PolitiFact that she and other investigators found the origin, or at least they think so, to this particular quote, saying that Jonathan Swift in 1710 wrote, "Falsehood flies and the truth comes limping after it." So, why did it go on a tangent about misattributed Churchill quotes? Because misinformation and disinformation exist everywhere, at all levels, at all frequencies, and even among the most well-meaning of us. And when you think that research is hard, remember those people had to sift through speeches all the way back to the 1700s to try and find the origin of it. We could do a little Google Reddit search. Tim Riley, the director of the National Churchill Museum at Westminster College in Fulton, Montana, told PolitiFact, "The irony is that today, such a misattributed quote can circle the globe 1,000 times before the truth even begins to think about putting its pants on." So never forget what it is that Jonathan Swift once wrote. Falsehood flies and the truth comes limping after it. Because if we can stop falsehood from even growing wings in the first place, then the truth will not only prevail, but maybe soar. One last tip about how to combat mis and disinformation online is that when you know you're right or when you want to correct somebody, there is no worse way to do it than to shame them. A lot of people just make mistakes online. A lot of people's path in life led them to believing something that wasn't true, and you should correct them with compassion and not speak down to them, because the more you correct them with lack of compassion or you make them feel stupid, the more likely they are to defend that falsehood. People believe lies of all types and sizes for a whole bunch of reasons. Okay, it could be their inherent bias or maliciousness or just boredom. Gossip is a type of lie, and I love some gossip, okay? That's a good fun time. It is much more fun to pretend that you have access to secret knowledge and truth that can protect you from an unpredictable world than it is to admit that you're likely encountering someone who starts a video with "no one is talking about this," or "what they don't want you to know" might just be fishing for views, or an AI-generated bot, or in the case of some folks, had their brain eaten by a worm. All right. Well, until next time, I'm V Spear, and like I always say, you are smart. Trust yourself. If something doesn't feel right, or if it feels too good to be true, you might want to check yourself before you hit that repost button or pull that voting lever.